Right, I'll call to order the regular meeting of the Common Council of the City of Platteville for Tuesday, October 9th, 2018, and we'll start with roll call.
Robin Klein is excused. Don Francis.
Here.
Barbara Stockhausen.
Here.
Ken Killian.
Here.
Eileen Nichols.
Here.
Sina Sharp.
Here.
Barbara Doss.
Here. First item is consideration of the consent calendar. The following items may be approved in a single motion and vote due to their routine nature of previous discussion. Please indicate to the council president if you prefer separate discussion and action. Council minutes from our September 25th regular meeting and also our October 2nd special meeting. B is payment of bills. C, financial report for September. D is appointments to boards and commissions. I have none this evening. E is licenses, a temporary Class B to sell fermented malt beverages and wine to the Mining and Rollo Jameson Museums on Saturday, November 10th from 11 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. Number 2 is 1 year and 2 year operator licenses to sell and serve alcohol. And the last one is permits, a walk for domestic violence awareness family advocates, October 16th from 5:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the consent calendar.
A second.
We have a motion and a second, and we'll vote.
Francis.
Yes.
Stockhausen.
Yes.
Killian.
Yes.
Nichols.
Yes.
Sharp.
Yes.
Doss.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next is citizens' comments, observations, and petitions, if any, and we have no one who's asked to speak this evening. Reports in our packet, Museum Board, Stockhausen.
Nothing to add.
Historic Preservation Committee, Killian.
No additions.
Redevelopment Authority would be Klein, and she is absent. Zoning Board of Appeals, Dawes. Other reports in the packet, Water and Sewer Financial Report for September, also the September Airport Financial Report and Department Progress Reports. Any questions or comments on any of those? Right, hearing none, we'll go on to the first action item, which is Contract 718 Thin Overlay. Howard?
Yes, this is our annual street maintenance contract to place thin overlay of asphalt on selected streets to extend the life of those streets. The budget was $150,000 of that. 120 was designated from the wheel tax. We solicited bids for this, had one bidder, Iverson Construction. Due to repairs needed for the center line of Chestnut Adams and Lancaster, we're recommending dropping the final street off the list. It'll reduce the contract amount to $120,369.48, and so I recommend that this contract be awarded.
Have any questions? A motion then?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the thin overlay contract. We'll vote.
Francis.
Yes.
Stockhausen.
Yes.
Killian.
Yes.
Nichols.
Yes.
Sharp.
Yes.
Doss.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next is Contract 818 Highway Painting. Howard.
Yes. This would do our annual painting of center lines and other pavement markings on highways. Our intent is to repaint Highway 81 from the intersection of Water and Pine all the way up to the north city limits at Ridge Avenue. We solicited bids from 3 contractors who've previously performed this job. We received only one bid. And so what we have is, we had budget of $30,000, total cost of $30,970. My recommendation is to award the bid, base and alternate bid for the total of $30,970, and we would take that extra money out of the other contract that we just did.
Questions, anyone on that? Is there a motion then?
I move to approve the ordinance, contract, yeah. Yeah.
818 for highway.
Yep,
painting?
818 for highways.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and we'll vote.
Francis.
Yes.
Stockhausen.
Yes.
Killian.
Yes.
Nichols.
Yes.
Sharp.
Yes.
Doss.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Ordinance 1810, stop signs on Greenwood Avenue. Howard.
Yes. In the past, this small one-block section of Greenwood Avenue between Bradford and South Hickory Street acted as more of an alley with very limited traffic. There were no stop signs, and due to the limited traffic, there were little problems with conflicts. Now that we have the Newman Heights apartments, the increase in traffic on Greenwood Avenue, it's appropriate to put stop sign at either end of the block to provide clear guidance for traffic. We've temporarily installed stop signs, but we need to have an implementing ordinance for this.
Questions on this?
I make a motion we adopt ordinance 1810, amending the official traffic map and placing stop signs on Greenwood Avenue at South Hickory Street and at Bradford Street.
Second.
Motion and a second, and we'll vote.
Francis,
Yes.
Stockhausen,
Yes.
Killian,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Sharp,
Yes.
Doss.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next is petition for appropriation, Grant County Highway Construction Aids.
Yes, this is an annual program where we put in $2,000 in escrow with the county. Grant County matches the funding for a street reconstruction project, and then at the end of the year, we request that money back from them. So we would normally just allocate this, and in order to make it official, we need to provide this petition to Grant County saying that we're doing this and we're asking them to put their money in as well.
So this would actually be for $4,000. This will increase the allocation for Lewis Street to $4,000, not $2,000?
The city allocates $2,000, the county would allocate $2,000. So however you want to do this, the city of Platteville in the petition is voting to allocate $2,000 towards this project, and we're asking through this petition that Grant County match that.
Appropriate the sum. Okay.
Is there a motion?
I move to approve.
Second.
A motion and a second, we'll vote.
Francis,
Yes.
Stockhausen,
Yes.
Killian,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Sharp,
Yes.
Doss.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, next is information and discussion. First is discontinuance of an unimproved alleys, Block 7 of Homestead Edition. Joe.
Yes, this is a request that was submitted by the Homestead Heights condominium. Their building is just up the hill from Quick Trip. Their driveway is off of Alden. They have two unimproved alleys, one to the north side of their building and one to the west of their building. They have a couple of projects that they'd like to do to the north of their building. They've got an existing driveway that's a little narrow and close to the building, and it's on the north side, so it gets shaded in the winter and gets a little slippery, so they'd like to widen that driveway and move it away from the building a little bit. But in order to do that, they need some additional space. So they'd like to have the alley discontinued. That would get them an additional 10 feet to work with. On the west side of their building, there's some trees, pine trees that are dying, and they're a little concerned that they're going to fall into their building in the storm. So they'd like to get in there and do some cleaning out and replanting, but they're not really sure if they're their trees or not. So they believe that they're located in the alley, so that if they have that discontinued, then they can get in there and do some work on those. As mentioned, both alleys are platted, but they're not improved. There's no utilities present in the alley, so they really don't serve any public purpose. So staff is recommending approval of the request to discontinue the alleys. The Plan Commission also recommended approval of the request, but they also included a suggestion or recommendation that the city maintain an easement across these alleys in case at some point in the future the city does need to install some utilities. We have a easement already in place. Any questions?
Just a comment, Joe, during the plan commission, it was brought up that the alley will still be accessible to the people on the other side. Closing this will not prevent them from using an alleyway to get to the back of their properties, is that correct?
Yeah, since this is unimproved, the improved portions of both of those alleys would still remain. The part that the people are actually using to access their properties would remain. Both of these portions are just grass at the moment. And as I mentioned, the one to the west is basically full of trees, so you can't really use that for access anyway. The one to the north of the building does have a little bit of a slope to it, so it wouldn't be ideal for vehicle access anyway.
Any questions for Joel or comments? All right, then on to a rezoning request for 130 Market Street.
Yes, the owner of that property has requested a rezoning of that site. It's currently the site of the Barbershop Rocks Salon and Spa on the first floor, and the second floor is a apartment building. They'd like to do some expansion of the business use on that site, so they would basically get rid of the apartment on the second floor. They'd expand the salon and spa into the second floor. And they'd also like to introduce, she's calling a speakeasy style lounge that would serve alcohol on site. The current CBT business, Central Business Transition District zoning does not allow businesses that serve alcohol. So they're requesting a rezoning of that property to B2 Central Business District, which does allow uses that include alcohol. The use would also require a liquor license to be approved, which is pending. They've submitted the application. The council will have that, I think, for information at your next meeting. Really, the difference between the B2 and the CBT district are fairly minor as far as the uses. Obviously, the uses that include alcohol are allowed in the B2, but not the CBT. The current CBT district allows residential on the ground floor, but the B2 district does not, so there will be a little bit of difference in future uses of that site. It would still allow the residential on the second floor if they chose to change that in the future. Staff does recommend approval of the request, and the Planning Commission also recommended approval. Any questions?
Joe, can you verify the zoning in that block? There's a church at the east end of City Park.
Church and then
And
the
the
house that goes with
house,
the church. So for
Those are both zoned institutional?
institutional. This property is currently CBT. The property to the west of this property is CBT. And then across what used to be a street is now a driveway is B2.
Too. And what used to be a church behind this property?
Just
Where-
to the north is now the music shop.
Right.
Has been rezoned to CBT.
So it's CBT.
All right.
Okay. And then the telephone, or whatever it is, CenturyLink, that's CBT.
Correct. And then on the City Park to the south, and then to the west of City Park is the funeral home, which is B2.
B2. Okay.
The liquor license, is this a replacement of a license which has been used but no longer in use? Now they're going to use it? Is it a new license? What's the situation on the liquor license?
The liquor license would be one of the original liquor licenses. It's been surrendered to the city by a business who's no longer in business. So we currently have it at the city. So it's been applied for.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, then on to the city manager proposed 2019 budget. And we will have a presentation on the screen in the back.
So, as has been our practice, I'm going to give a brief overview of the city manager proposed budget for 2019. We will actually be passing or emailing or printing hard copies, depending on your preference, of the entire list of accounts. by the end of this week. So you'll have that in advance of our work session next Tuesday. The world's most sensitive clicker. So just as a reminder of our budget calendar, obviously we as staff have started the budget process back in August, July even. The council met to discuss our goals with city staff during 2 meetings in August. We had our first work session on the CIP on the 2nd. We have a couple more work sessions scheduled to go through in more detail the operating budget itself before there's a public presentation on November 19th with hopefully the budget being finalized on November 22nd. So I know the council members are probably doing a collective groan at this point because we go through this sustainable budget so many times. But just for the benefit of our audience, we've really been focusing on this during the last 2 years, what it means to have a sustainable budget and what the components of that are, and talking about it from a bond rater's perspective and the types of things that a bond rater looks at, having good financial policies, not being unduly burdened by debt, having enough revenue to cover our ongoing expenses, good predictability in our ability to capture that revenue, and sufficient cash reserves. And then also from the city manager's perspective, a few additional things that we think about, being able to maintain our infrastructure so that we will maximize its expected life. Again, that we've got funds available for the predictable replacement of equipment and repair of our buildings and facilities, that we're reserving debt for our large capital projects that have an extended life, that we have enough contingency funds to deal with unexpected expenses and or sometimes opportunities, and that we're able to pay a market competitive wage. We've used this slide in the past before just to talk about that for all cities and probably counties as well. It's an era of difficult trade-offs. We're a service organization. By far the vast majority of our funds go towards salaries and benefits for our employees. There's also a considerable funds that go towards maintaining our streets, buildings, and equipment. But then we also like to be able to carve out some dollars for new initiatives that are important to the community. And this pie is no representative as the true pie, because the wages and benefits would take up considerably more, and the new initiatives would be more of a sliver. And all this has to be sort of accomplished in an era of generally diminishing state support from some of our key revenues and expenditure restraint program. So for the city of Platteville, we've been talking about that our debt has posed an additional challenge for us that's maybe above and beyond what general municipalities are generally facing. And this slide just shows the general obligation debt. And if you look at that slide, and I apologize, it's probably a little bit hard to read, but we will have this posted online. You can see that the city is well within its debt capacity, both our internal policy and the policy that's set by the state. You can also see our debt through the policy that we identified with our long-range financial plan is leveling off. Right now, we're at 89% of our internal policy with respect to our debt level. So it's not necessarily the level of debt that's the issue for us, but it has been more kind of the structure of the debt payments themselves. And so we had the issue of some debt that was what we call backloaded or increasing over time. And so then this just gives a sense of that picture for our general obligation debt payments. And then you can see some variation there. But then when we look at our levy-supported debt payments, that's when we say levy-supported, meaning that we're relying directly on taxes to pay those debt payments. You can see that there's a considerable jump between 2018 and 2019 with respect to those payments. So when we met with the council in our preliminary goal setting process, We'd identified kind of 4 themes that we would be working on during the upcoming year, and this is the 3rd year of a 3-year strategic plan. The first being infrastructure, and the council had talked about wanting to potentially implement the city hall, and I don't want to even call it a renovation or remodel because I think that makes it sound bigger than it is. I would say HVAC upgrade and space use plan, because a real renovation or remodel of this building, from previous estimates and works that was done back in 2009, is then it was between $2 to $3 million. It's probably between $3 to $4 million now. So what we're talking here is a substantially scaled back endeavor. The business highway 151 improvements and some enhanced landscaping and tree replacement. We also discussed marketing, continuing to work on continuity and our branding throughout the city, marketing the city to UWP and involving UWP students in city life. Connections, working on the development of an inclusivity plan with all of our stakeholders. And then lastly, housing. And we really didn't identify specific targets or goals with respect to housing because we're still waiting for the results of the housing study, which we're working on and we should expect within the next 2 months. We had hoped to have it by now, but unfortunately it was a little delayed. So with respect to 2019 for the budget summary, you can see, again, when you look across our major funds, the general fund, taxi bus, debt, the debt is really the challenge this year in terms of the percentage of change. And the budget that you will receive shows a total levy increase of 4.5%. I don't want anyone to hear that 4.5% though and think that that means that they're necessarily going to see their tax bill go up 4.5%. At this point, we don't know what it will mean for the tax bill. The first thing to know is that the city is only a portion of a resident's tax bill, I think roughly 32 cents on the dollar. There's also been overall growth in the city's tax base, which lessens the impact of that levy increase. And then really the third variable for this year that really makes it challenging for any resident to predict is the revaluation. We know that the revaluation will reduce our mill rate, and it really is going to depend house by house in terms of what the actual impact will be on their property. We'll have a better sense of what that new mill rate will be when we get closer to the November budget presentation and we get the final numbers from the state of Wisconsin. So in the general fund, just in terms of some of the more significant changes, and in general, we don't make a lot of changes to our budget year to year. We're really dealing with very small increments. But the most significant change that you would see this year is an adjustment to our salary ranges of 2%, our proposed adjustment. We are not proposing any steps unless covered by the union contract, which is just our police officers or previously committed. There are some areas where we've proposed modest increases in utilities, fuel, and building maintenance. We did decrease our stormwater management funds because we have found that we didn't need as much as what we had budgeted when we implemented the new stormwater regulations. And then also our GIS consulting contract because we now have an in-house employee that's able to do a majority of that work. The proposed budget does maintain some contingency funds, which was one of our sustainability measures. And it does not increase previously reduced areas. So back in over the 2017-2018 timeframe, there was some areas in which we did some budget reductions, again, trying to work towards a sustainable budget overall. And we've maintained those with the exception of wage increases. So last week we met with the council to talk about priorities for the CIP. What's proposed here largely reflects the feedback that I received, but not entirely. So I did make a few tweaks to some of what what was proposed when we got to the end of that session. So in terms of infrastructure and buildings, you see the airport master plan, which would be funded through outside sources, and the same with the airport fuel farm, which is proposed to be funded through appropriations from the state of Wisconsin and revenues from the airport itself. We see the first phase of the Business Highway 151 project, where we're paying for engineering fees. The majority of that would be paid through the grant that we're receiving, but the city would be responsible for some portion of that. 2 street projects, Court Street from Madison to Lewis, and Lewis Street from Water to Court, and for a total of about $1.1 million in terms of not including the water and sewer fund. And so again, those 2 streets are reflective of our long-range financial plan, where we made the agreement that we would only add as much debt as what was falling off of our debt schedule. We also have the Camp Street sidewalk with some money from the tax levy, and then carrying over some of the money that had been committed this year by both the city and the school district to implement a bike lane. City Hall Phase 1, and this is slightly different than some of the options that we had looked at when we met last week. We worked hard with Delta 3 to kind of even out and lower the amount of cost for the first year to implement the HVAC and space use plan. And so Phase 1 now proposed doing HVAC in the whole building, so the first floor and second floor. And when I say the whole building, I do mean the office areas. This would not include the auditorium. And then we would complete the actual space reconfiguration on the first floor south, which is the current city manager office area. Then in 2020, the plan would be to complete the space configuration on the second floor, and then in the third year to complete the space configuration on the first floor north part, where the finance and water sewer offices currently are. And then the last item with respect to buildings were a combination of museum projects dealing with some windows and UV light protection on the windows, roof repair, and signage. With respect to equipment, we had a 2.5-ton plow truck replaced, pavement router, parks mower, park truck with a plow, and a taxi vehicle. And again, the taxi vehicle is largely being paid through outside sources. And then lastly, in the other category, some things that we do traditionally every year, our sidewalk repair, which we talked about tonight, street overlays, highway striping. And the highway striping, some of that's being paid from some carryover funds from our wheel tax from this year. And then something that is new, which is stream bank restoration, and this would be a project that would help deal with some of the water overflow on the Roundtree Branch stream around the chamber, and then as it goes into the university property, some riprap. And the university would be a funding partner on this, but the majority of this funding is also coming from a DNR grant. So in total, about $238,000 of the CIP is being supported through our tax levy, $333,000 through our unassigned fund balance, again, about $1.1 million in debt and bonds, and then $1.2 million in other sources, which could be grants, other government entities, or carryovers from this year. For a total of $2.9 million. As you know from our previous discussions about our policies, boy, this is making weird noises, isn't it? As you know from our previous discussions, the city has a policy that we always maintain 20% of, in our unassigned fund balance, we maintain 20% of our general fund expenditures. That's really important for our bond rating. And for this budget of the unassigned fund balance of 2.5 million, again, we're using about 33,000 towards the CIP, and we'd have about 2.2 million remaining in that unassigned fund balance, which represents 27%. So well above the 20% that we've committed to. We think it's important to be above that 20% because we do see some variability in outcomes from year to year, and we also think this is going to help cushion our CIP a little bit in future years when we're not being repaid back from TID 7, the monies that were owed to the city. There were a couple of unusual funding sources in the CIP this year, and I did want to call them out. They're both one-time funding sources that are being proposed. One are funds that were generated from the sale of the former senior center property, and we're proposing that 101,000 of the 151,000 sale price be put towards the CIP, but that the remaining 50,000 be held in the senior trust account for more discussion about how to best use that money, but that it would be put towards something related to our senior programming. That could mean that it just remains in the trust and becomes the interest becomes a revenue source for senior programming. It could be that we choose to make improvements to the parking lot at OE Gray, but that there would be more discussion with respect to how that money might be best used with some of the senior advisory board. Is that the right name? What are and pass potentially. The other one is the ambulance replacement account. And so this was an account that the city had for the replacement of ambulances. It was a sinking fund. The city is no longer responsible for replacing ambulances since that function has been transferred over to Southwest Health. And so this money is now available for use. So we're proposing that it be used to help fund the CIP this year. So sometimes I think people wonder how can we afford some of CIP projects, maybe like we redid the Mineral Street parking lot this year, or some of the other projects that we've worked on, when we aren't able to fund some other city activities, or when we reduced the museum budget, or we reduced the council salaries, or we reduced a public works position. And it's because we're looking at different sources of money. So just in a very general sense, to have a structurally balanced budget, you want to have ongoing funding sources for operating expenses. And when you have one-time funding sources like the sale of the senior center building, or that the money's in the ambulance sinking fund, you want to use that money towards one-time expenses. And so those lend themselves very well to the capital improvement plan. So if you think about if you were to win a $1,000 lottery and, you go out and buy a home with a $1,000 mortgage, you're going to have enough money for 1 month, but you're not going to have enough money for subsequent months. And it's the same with an operating budget. But if you were to use the $1,000 to buy a home theater, then that's not going to present an ongoing liability for you. And so that's also something that our auditors and our bond raters are looking at, is whether or not our revenue sources are matching the types of expenditures that they're supporting. And so that's why I think people may see that and wonder why, and that's why. Just on a slightly different topic, we wanted to talk briefly about our tax increment district results. And overall, it was good news. When you looked at TID number 4, that's the old industrial park, we saw a change of 3%. That district is projected to will close next year, and it will close in the black. The city has the option of extending that another year under new legislation, and being able to use the increment for affordable housing related projects. And we estimate that will be roughly $200,000 that could be available. TID 5, which is the Keystone Development, Walgreens Menards area, also saw a positive gain. We all know that there's a new Burger King out there. I would note, however, that this gain comes after a loss of 7% last year due to Walmart challenging their assessment and us negotiating a settlement with them. After we negotiated that settlement, Walmart challenged their assessment again, and that has been forwarded on to court. We did not settle this time, and so that challenge is reflective of what's known as the dark store tax loophole. You can see a link there for additional information about this topic, and we're going to try to play a brief video on it if we can when I get done with this. Slide. But this is an ongoing challenge for municipalities that have big box retail and Walgreens types of stores. And it's a challenge for us because we're relatively small, but we're just big enough to have those types of businesses in our community. And while we value them and what they add, these tax challenges are resulting in a tax shift within our community from these businesses to residential property owners and small business owners or local business owners. I just saw that there's going to be a question on the November ballot with respect to this issue that was placed on there by the county. So I encourage anyone that's listening to go out and do research on the topic and to really take a look at it and consider the issue when you vote. As it stands now, there's strong bipartisan support to close the dark store tax loophole, but unfortunately it hasn't come forward for a vote. So it will require legislative action for this issue to be corrected. Moving on to TID 6. TID 6 would be the new industrial park, Uber Sox, and sort of out towards the hospital, a 5% growth in the TID district there. And then in TID 7, which is the downtown area, a 30% growth, which is largely the result of the library block project and the added value that brought. So with that, I think we'll give the video a try and see if our connection's good enough.
If there are big box or other chain retailers in your community, your property taxes may be going up. That's because certain commercial properties have been able to obtain special tax reductions. Perhaps you've heard of these tax breaks. They're known as the dark store and Walgreens loopholes. Unless If there are big box or other chain retailers in your community, your property taxes may be going up. That's because certain commercial properties have been able to obtain special tax reductions. Perhaps you've heard of these tax breaks. They're known as the dark store and Walgreens loopholes. Unless the state legislature closes these loopholes, other property owners, including homeowners, will pay an average of 8% more in property taxes. Even more in some communities. Communities like the town of Grand Chute, Ashwaubenon, Sheboygan, West Bend, Franklin, Pleasant Prairie, Sun Prairie, La Crosse, and Rice Lake. You see, the total amount of property taxes a local government may collect is strictly limited by state law. The size of the property tax pie stays pretty much the same from one year to the next. What can and does change is how the pie gets divided. When one kind of property, like big box stores, pays less, other kinds, like residential and mom-and-pop businesses, pay more. Let's take a closer look at the dark store loophole. Attorneys for big box chains claim that a brand new store in a busy area has the same value for tax purposes as a vacant, boarded-up, dark property located in an unpopular location. Here's an actual example. A Lowe's store in Wauwatosa is assessed for taxes at $13.6 million. Lowe's claims it's only worth $7.1 million. Yet Lowe's spent in excess of $16 million to acquire the land and build the structure. Lowe's argues that even the land was devalued from $9 million to $3 million once the big box store was constructed. And Lowe's insists its store can only be compared to vacant dark stores for property tax purposes. Ironically, as big box stores fight for a smaller share of property taxes, they use more municipal services. Big box stores demand more police, fire, and ambulance service than other commercial properties, and way more than residential properties. Every day, municipal police, fire, and ambulance respond to calls from big box stores. Meanwhile, the cost of paying for these services gets shifted to homeowners, the class of property using these services the least. The other loophole is called Walgreens after a 2008 Wisconsin Supreme Court decision. That ruling allows national pharmacies and other businesses who lease their store to claim the value of their properties, for tax purposes, is less than half of the actual sale price. Here's another real example. Walgreens challenged the city of Oshkosh's assessment of its store. The Court of Appeals, relying on the 2008 decision, decided that the value of the Walgreens property was $2.2 million, much less than the $4.3 million actual 2009 sale price of the property. Other taxpayers, mainly homeowners, now have to cover Walgreens' former share of the taxes. Plus, Oshkosh taxpayers had to pay the corporation a tax refund of $69,500. Nearly 300 pharmacies in Wisconsin can take advantage of this loophole, including stores in Ashland, Onalaska, Dodgeville, Beaver Dam, Weston, Appleton, and Sturgeon Bay, and in your neighborhood. Other commercial and manufacturing businesses that lease their space are also beginning to use this same loophole. Only the Wisconsin State Legislature can stop this unfair tax shift. Tell your state legislators to restore fairness and common sense to the property tax system by closing the dark store and Walgreens loopholes. Call your state legislator through the legislative hotline at 1-800-362-9472 or visit darkstoreloopholes.org.
And I would just like to recognize Senator Markline and Representative Tranel because they've both been very good advocates on this issue for us. And with that, that is it for my presentation. Our next meeting will be next Tuesday. You'll get more budget detail later this week. Yes, sir.
Would we get a hard copy, or is it gonna be in the budget that you'll spell out actually what phase 1 is of City Hall?
We can provide that detail for you.
Any other questions or requests? All right, thank you for the presentation. Next is the 2018-2020 audit proposal.
Okay, in your packet, you'll see the summary sheet along with the breakdown of the services for the next 3 years from 4 firms, and then the fee structure page of each one of those 4 firms. I sent out an RFP for auditing proposals to 8 firms, and out of the 8 firms, I received 4 proposals from these different firms, and I'd like to suggest accepting the proposal from Johnson Block. This firm's located in Mineral Point, also hires UWP graduates. We've got a good working relationship with them. They're excellent in their expertise knowledge of the Wisconsin statutes and governmental issues such as the TIFs and the Wisconsin PSC. And they've got over 200 governmental clients, which is cities, villages, townships, and school districts, with all of their municipal clients being strictly from Wisconsin. And most of them are in the southwest region. And their offices are in Mineral Point, Madison, Viroqua, and La Crosse. And over the past 2 years, I've participated in the city of Platteville audits, and we're got some personnel changes coming up from past and present years, and would just prefer to remain with Johnson Block for the next 3 years.
Questions, anyone?
Is that even possible, since they weren't the low bidder?
It is for a service contract.
I mean, not that their bid was excessively higher than the next bid.
The one thing was Shank, it was only $300 less. They're out of Green Bay, and their proposal said that in the first year they wouldn't charge any extra expenses for their services, but it kind of eluded that the next 2 years after that, once they got their feet wet and learned what they were doing, then their travel expenses would be added to the cost.
Right, any other questions? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. We'll vote.
Francis?
Yes.
Stockhausen?
Yes.
Killian?
Yes.
Nichols?
Yes.
Doss?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, thanks, everybody.